3 hours ago, Airbnb in their community forum, I have not seen any updates to the public-facing website, but in their community forum for hosts, an administrator posted a recovery update to our COVID-19 extenuating circumstances policy, which is interesting because initially they said that these cancellations were not part of the extenuating circumstances policy, and there was a separate COVID-19 policy that they developed in March that would apply. Now they're blending the two things. There's probably a dozen different variations of what Airbnb has said the policy is that applies, whether or not it's the ECP, whether or not it's the ECP. And now, of course, there's just continued confusion as to what authority Airbnb is operating under, what provision of the terms of service, and what policy. The general idea here is that Airbnb is under the belief that it will simply do whatever it wants, and Airbnb hosts can simply take it or leave it. So here's the bad news, and here's why we're contacting you today. Airbnb is essentially obsoleted your strict cancellation policy today, and here's why. So, documentation standards and travel credit. Let's take a look at what they say here. Currently, if the reservation is canceled under the extenuating circumstances policy for COVID-19 related reasons, the guest is required to provide documentation if they want a cash refund. So, let's break that apart. If the guest cancels for COVID-19, they have to provide documentation if they want a refund. Now, they don't tell you what that documentation is, and they don't, of course, share any of that documentation with you, so it could be essentially they don't have to provide much of anything, and they're just simply going to override your strict cancellation policy or other cancellation policy. However, this is what they're saying. If the reason is COVID-19, they have to provide documentation if they want cash. So let's just go ahead and take this out and highlight this. If they want cash. If a guest decides to take the refund in the form of a travel credit, which of course is not a refund, that in this instance, Airbnb is going to keep their money, which is your payout, and give a travel credit, which we know from previously that it was a 12-month travel credit, to that guest. And in that instance, documentation is not required. All they have to do is attest that they cannot complete their trip. All they have to do is say the words COVID-19, and your strict cancellation policy will be overridden. The guest will not get any refund, you will not get any payout, and Airbnb will apparently keep the money. Of course, if the guest doesn't use the credit, then your payouts actually go to Airbnb from everything that we can tell. Okay? Now it says, however, they are required to attest that they cannot complete their trip to COVID-19. Now, the word attest is defined as sworn under oath. And so for the duration here, Airbnb has taken the position that guests, that travelers are attesting that the reason they can't travel is COVID-19. That means that they're providing a sworn affidavit or declaration if you accept the plain language of what Airbnb is telling hosts is required of guests. But we've seen the interaction between guests and customer support. We've seen no evidence that Airbnb has actually followed through on its policy requiring guests to attest under oath, provide a sworn statement under penalty of perjury and jail time that the COVID-19 rationale applies. And even so, what does that even mean? I can't travel because of COVID-19. Is that all that's required? So even if they were required to swear under oath, because there's no transparency, it's hard to know what would actually be required in terms of language. In order for the terms of service to have any validity, you would have to be provided the information which would allow you to agree or disagree that it is a COVID reason or an unrelated reason. Even if they still got the refund, you have to know whether or not you have an arbitration right based on the evidence provided. And of course, Airbnb has denied you all of that. The sub and substance of this paragraph is that Airbnb is going to be converting your payouts into credits whenever a guest wants to make a cancellation, if Airbnb can force that. Notice they've made the bar really low, no documentation required, and we suspect no attestation, no sworn statement is being required either, despite what Airbnb is saying. So they're essentially pushing the guests into credits, converting your payouts, which they have no interest in and no entitlement to under any theory under the terms of service or otherwise. They are a fiduciary holding your money, similar to an escrow agent. There is no possible legal theory by which they can convert that money from you to them, or from the guest, if it happens to be a legitimate cancellation, to Airbnb. So there's so much going on here that is a violation of the terms of service, a breach of their fiduciary duty, other causes of action of really what amount to consumer fraud. So let's just dig a little deeper. For guests who do opt to pursue a cash refund, there are currently 4 cancellation reasons to choose from. I don't know what that means, whether or not there's some sort of drop down. And so they have to provide apparently documentation to get the cash. Would be really interesting to know what documentation is required, because if Airbnb is treating guests the same way they're treating hosts, what they're really probably doing here, or what they could be doing, is raising the bar on the documentation to again force people to simply take the travel credit. Okay, so we're not sure what transportation disruptions or closures under the ECP. It has to be no other means of travel, no other route by which to get there. What does it mean in this context? It's completely ambiguous. There's no way that this new policy, for which you didn't get 30 days notice, right, which they're now applying retroactively to existing reservations, there's no way this is legal or lawful or enforceable from my point of view. Medical instructions, not sure what the level is required there. Mandated restrictions, border closures, and mandatory quarantines or isolation. Again, none of these things existed in the ECP that actually applies to the reservations that no doubt were made before March, that now apply to your reservations, or even the ones after March that apply to your reservations. Airbnb's approach here: do whatever it wants, change the rules, no transparency, do everything they can to convert that money that's supposed to go to hosts to Airbnb. Given the unpredictability of COVID-19, hosts will likely continue to see cancellations who meet the 4 criteria above. What this is telling you is that you should expect Airbnb to completely obsolete your strict cancellation policy for a long time into the future. For a long time into the future. We have heard for as long as potentially a year, they're going to keep extending the extenuating circumstances policy. We'll have to wait and see how that goes down. But the end result here is that they are modifying your existing contracts to which they are not a party. They are acting as a property manager and getting involved in the hosting of the properties, which is illegal according to, and does not happen according to Airbnb when they're dealing with municipalities and states and countries with regulations. They're breaching the terms of service, and they're interfering with your contracts with guests. Airbnb cannot, on the one hand, tell hosts you're in control of your cancellation policy and then take it away on the backside. They cannot, with guests, hide the cancellation policy like they do when they make reservations, burying it at the bottom of the comments, and then all of a sudden try and get as many people to sign up to bookings as possible, and then hope that guests are going to feel like they have been treated fairly. Airbnb is doing a disservice to everyone, guests and hosts. We're bringing arbitrations. We should expect that these kinds of unilaterally driven decisions by Airbnb will continue until hosts stand up and say enough is enough. We want accountability. We want you to comply with the terms of service. We want you to stop interfering with our contracts. We want you to respect our cancellation policies. We want you to stop interfering with our relationship with our customers, the guests, and stay out of the management and hosting business. Do what Airbnb is supposed to do. Hosts are asking Airbnb, stay out of the hosting business. You build the platform, let us do the hosting. If you're going to escrow the money to make sure that the booking is as represented on the date and time that has been booked before you release the final payment, then that would be a legitimate escrow arrangement and escrow service. The ECP is simply a way for Airbnb to void your cancellation policies and be in complete control of money in which they have no interest. We believe these are subject to attack in arbitration and in court, and we'll continue to advise you as we go.